Hi there, and welcome to the Homestead Education Podcast. Do you have a homestead, farm, or just dream of a rural life? This is a show to help you and your kids grow your own food and grow as a person. I'm your host, Kody Hanner. I'm a homesteader, homeschool mom of 6, and small town enthusiast. I was raised by an old school rancher and blessed by the grace of God to have been exposed to so much of what rural life has to offer. Join me every week to talk about homesteading, homeschooling, and growth with a homestead education. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Homestead Education Podcast. Today, I am actually recording at our city park. So if you hear some strange noises, that is all that's going on. Today, I have Trevor Hollenback from Hollenback Shearing. He's a professionally trained and employed as a sheep shearer in the US, New Zealand, Australia, and Austria. Thank you for joining me today, Trevor.
Thanks for having me.
And did I say all your stuff right?
Yeah, you got it dialed in. That's it.
Awesome. So I'm really glad you're able to make it. We've had a little bit of a hard time connecting because you've had such a busy spring.
Yes. Yeah, spring for sheep shearers and for just anyone involved with sheep is going to be pretty busy. Typically, you're growing out your lambs at that point if you've got a sheep operation, because generally speaking, you're gonna lamb out late winter, early spring, and then as the heat starts to set in, as it has up here for us in North Idaho, your phone starts blowing up because people didn't realize it was going to get so hot so soon. They didn't realize they had to shear sheep, whatever the reason is, right? They come out of the woodwork in the spring and they need you yesterday, every day. So.
Well, that actually, it brings up this wonderful conversation. That's why I've created my whole platform. Is I'm so excited for everybody that is jumping into farming right now and wanting to strive for self-sufficiency. But when you don't know how to care for animals, care for the land, that's where I want to come in and be able to teach that so that I can support people in their endeavors.
Yeah, it's huge.
I was joking about it on my podcast a couple of days ago that, it's a blissful ignorance. And I'm not saying that in a
like
bad
a condescending
way.
A
condescending. That's the word I was looking for. Because I always use the example of when I started my speaking tour, my first place that I landed, I had to go get my rental car and they told me, oh, you have to get an Uber this time of day to get your rental car. And I had no clue how to get an Uber. I was so upset. But Ubers aren't really a thing in North Idaho.
Yep. I bet you learned Uber pretty fast.
I did, yes.
Yeah, just now like people who get sheep. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They learn very quickly that if you have a wool breed, you're going to need to either figure out how to shear on your own, which is exceedingly difficult if you haven't been trained, or find somebody who can do it. So that's, it's a big wake up call for a lot of people.
I will say I have sheared a sheep before, and I currently do not own any sheep because I'm not interested in doing it.
When did you shear a sheep and in what context?
It was in college and we all had to try. So.
Oh, okay. I like it. Everybody should learn, or not learn how, but everybody should at least attempt to shear a sheep, and then they'll realize maybe this is something I want to outsource.
Right. I did lambs in 4-H, but we had a gal that came and just sheared our sheep for us.
Right.
But yeah, when I was in college, I went to Chico State and I worked in the sheep and goat unit. So that was part of our job. I also got to be there at 5 every morning for lambing. So
I bet you did. Yeah. That's definitely a thing.
It absolutely is, because sheep don't like their own children. So you have to find them and put them in a jug.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you've got such a wide variety of sheep. I think sheep among livestock, I think there are more distinct breeds of sheep in the world than almost any other livestock. I guess I want to say goats would maybe be a close second, but there are thousands of distinct breeds. And then there are even more that we don't know about, because you've got, like let's say you go to some corner of the Himalayas or somewhere, right, where they don't, if you ask them if the breed was a distinct breed or a registered breed or anything like that, they'd probably just look at you with a bunch of question marks over their head. Like, what is that? Why would I do that? This is just the sheep that we have in this little corner of our world that works really well for our world. And that's kind of the cool thing about sheep. You can hone the breed to fit your needs very quickly, really in relation to other and other livestock animals, they adapt very quickly and respond very quickly to selective breeding. So it's kind of a cool thing to see what people come up with.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because that was another one, is how well they fare up here, in our really cold weather. Or I
Oh
always
yeah.
wondered how they did well, like when I grew up in California and it's a million degrees all the time.
Yeah. So with that, there are breeds that are, wool breeds as a general rule are cold weather critters. They do really well in the cold. They do not do well in the heat. So in California, I first started working in California. I was born and raised in Ventura County,
Okay.
and not a county that's known for sheep, but I traveled pretty far to shear some jobs. And in California, there are a lot of sheep that have to get sheared twice a year because of the heat, because you're trying to beat the heat when it sets in the beginning of the year, right? So people will shear, I don't know, April, right? And sometimes that's too late for some breeds. It's just too hot in April in some parts of California. And you got to do it as early as possible to avoid that, because they can't cool off, right? It's like a husky, right? If you had a husky in the desert, in the desert Southwest, it would be cruel not to groom it, right? You would just it would just lay there panting all day. And that's what sheep do. Wool breeds, they just lay there and pant because they can't do anything about it. They'll seek shade. And if they really have no respite from the heat, they'll suffer health-wise. And so in California and in other really hot climates, you have to shear twice a year, because the only way, because you'll get to October and it's hot. And by then they've got, if you shear in April, what is that? You've got 6 months of wool on there. And so it gets to be a bit of a health issue for the animals. So that's one thing I think.
Even
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say the winter, a little bit of a lag, but the winters are so mild in California too, that like as I grew up there too, I often wore sandals all winter long.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But up here, then when you get into a place like, well, first in California, a lot of people will opt for a hair sheep, right? And hair sheep are kind of more primitive in their origins, and they don't require any kind of shearing because they were never bred to produce wool. And wool is the fiber that humans want, right? Because wool is this amazing fiber. But the one not so amazing thing about wool is that it does not fall out. It will just continue to grow indefinitely. So if you don't shear them, they're gonna suffer pretty badly. So a lot of people in hot climates will opt for a hair breed. They don't have to shear. The downside to a hair breed is you don't get wool, and wool is an awesome product, especially on a small, if you're looking at small production, or if you're looking at a homestead type setting. If you were to market your fleeces, individually, and send a little picture with the sheep that it came from and have a name on it, you could sell raw fleeces for decent money, and you would definitely get your shearing paid for by marketing the fleeces individually. So it is a benefit. A lot of people, I don't want to have to deal with the wool. Well, in some cases, I would totally understand that, but in a lot of cases, it can be a good benefit to have it. But then up here, you probably wouldn't do well to get a hair breed. Like our winters can be so cold and so unpredictable that unless you had some kind of heated shelter for your animals, they probably wouldn't do terribly well. And they're not going to want to be out in the snow and walking around on the ice. But if you get a breed that's used to that, a lot of really popular homestead breeds are a little more primitive. They're smaller. So like Shetlands and Icelandics, those animals they don't care. They'll walk around in the snow all day and not mind that. You'll give them shelter and they'll stand outside the shelter in the snow because they don't mind. It just doesn't bother them. Right. But,
sounds like my Great Pyrenees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you got Pyrenees to guard your sheep, then it's a win-win because they'll all be out there in the snow. So it's really a cool thing because you go to each farm I go to, again, it's a totally different situation, and people just find the right sheep that adapt to their situation. So it's fun to watch.
Oh yeah. So that actually brings up a question that I think I know the answer to, but I kind of want to cover it. Is for example, there are so many sheep in California. People don't realize how many sheep there are in California.
Oh yeah.
But I never even saw a hair breed as a kid. Well, maybe I saw some Navajo, whatever, some friends of mine raised in Hopland. But sheep they all have to be sheared, and they're all still sheared manually, right?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Sheep shearing, unlike a lot of other, I guess you'd maybe call them health-related tasks you have to do with livestock, is one of the ones that's probably going to be the last to become automated. It's not really something that can be mechanized or automated. And
I'm trying to like
they've
imagine
tried
running a sheep like down a conveyor belt or something.
Oh yeah. Oh well, people have tried. So the Australians tried to come up with an automated shearing machine that would kind of stretch the sheep out, kind of forelimbs forward and rear legs backwards. And
oh goodness,
it didn't work very well. I mean, the videos that I've seen of it, the animal doesn't get hurt. It just takes ages, and it does not come out looking very good. So a big thing when you're shearing is for the customer for the customer, you want to make sure that if they're going to use the wool, that the wool comes off in the longest length possible. And so the length of the fiber from the skin to the end on the outside, right, the part that's interfacing with the world, that's called your staple length. So you want as long a staple length as possible for it to be as usable as it can be, whether you're going to send it off to a mill or spin it yourself or whatever. And so when you cut that fiber in half, if you take that staple length and you cut right down the middle of it and you're not against the skin with the clippers, then you've destroyed a whole year of wool growth, right? And it's not really going to be usable for as much as it could have been usable for.
There's different, like if you're selling it, there's a different premium for staple length, right?
Yes. Yeah. So depending on what the customer is looking for, there are going to be different qualities of the wool that a customer is going to be looking at. Staple length is definitely one of them, depending on the application that it's intended for. But I mean, it could go on and on and on about wool quality, but I want to focus in on what do you want to ask me about shearing and all that?
Well, maybe I want to know about wool quality.
Oh, we can dive into that. So shoot, if you got questions, dive in.
So when you have a big herd and they have to be sheared every year, and I mean, when I say there's like, I've seen tons of sheep, like, I see a lot of people, they'll have, a handful of cows on their property. They'll have 20 or 30 sheep in the same place that somebody else would have a handful of cows.
Yeah.
So they need to bring a shearer in. What do they do with all that wool?
So that's going to depend on it's going to depend on a lot of things. One, what breed?
What are some options? Yeah.
So some ideas for people if you're sitting there thinking, okay, I've got 10 sheep or 20 sheep. I don't really know what to do with the wool. I don't know if it's even good enough to sell. Get with someone who in your community might be interested in using the wool so that they can get eyes on it and look at your wool and tell you whether or not this is something that could be marketed to hand spinners, for example. There are usually local, hand spinners and weavers guilds and groups. And so reaching out to one of those groups and saying, hey, I've got all this raw wool that has been harvested over the last few years and I've got it stored in my barn. I don't know if it's really worth, selling to someone such as yourselves who would want to use it for this application. Could you look at it? Usually they'll be happy to come look at it. If it's not marketable for that purpose, then some other options you can look at. And this is something I'm going to talk about at the Modern Homesteading Conference this next week. Wool has a lot of
looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. Some cool applications for wool. If you have what might be called marginal quality wool or low quality wool, or wool that's suffering from some contaminant like vegetable matter, right? If you've got a bunch of hay and seeds and stickers and things stuck in the wool, because they're like soft Velcro running around all year long, right? And everything kind of sticks to that wool. So if you're not in really clean conditions,
you keep painting these like ridiculous pictures that I'm talking about.
Well, it is. I mean, yeah, it actually is like that. It's hilarious. The stuff they bring in, you plop them down on the board for shearing. Like, how in the world did you get this caught in your fleece? And yeah, it's amazing. There'll be wire, there'll be seeds and stickers and all manner of things. So if they're not in really clean conditions, this wool would probably not be marketable for that purpose, for spinning, for weaving, anything that's going to go into something that a human wants to use and look at that's got to look nice. Because if you've got vegetable matter in there, if you've got polytwine in there, if you've got any contaminants in there, those things aren't going to take dye. And so they stand out they stick out like a sore thumb in the finished product. So generally, if the wool's contaminated, you're going to be looking at other applications for the wool. One thing, like the easiest thing you could do is just compost it. That's by far the easiest thing you could do. It's high nitrogen, low phosphorus, slow release fertilizer, basically. I mean, it's just protein, right? And it breaks down and it's very high in nitrogen, very, very low in phosphorus, pretty low in potassium too. I think it's I think the NPK is 902. So it's excellent.
Wow.
If you've got something that needs nitrogen, which is like what every plant, right? But you don't want a lot of phosphorus. It's an excellent fertilizer. And underground, it will probably break down. It depends on your climate. Up here, it's probably a little slower, just like we know our compost piles, everything just takes longer up here because half the year it's frozen. So if you bury wool, in most climates, you're looking at probably about a year before it breaks down. But if you don't bury it, it can last quite a while, which kind of leads into another use that we use it for here at our home. We have raised beds in the backyard, and we put it kind of as a top dressing, like a mulch over the top of the garden beds. And so it does a few things. The first, and like what I think is kind of the best benefit to it, is it holds in the moisture in the soil. So when because wool is hygroscopic, like hygro, HYGRO. Hygroscopic, which means it holds on to a lot of water. I think it's something like 20 to 30 times its weight. It can hold on to water. And so when you put that on top of the soil and you're running something like drip irrigation, or you're just relying on the environment itself for the moisture in the soil, whether it's rain or just the ground itself, it will retain a ton of moisture for way longer. I think it's something like, there's a guy, I'm blanking on his name, in Utah, who did some studies, and he makes these little wool pellets actually from commercial wool that's of marginal quality. And he incorporated it into soil and then used it as a mulch on top. And I think he said he got, he had a control, right, that had nothing on it. And then he had a bed with the same exact plants, same exact location, same soil. And he used these wool pellets, and he was able to leave them unattended and unwatered for, I think, 8 days before seeing effects, while the other one, and this is in Utah, the other one was like 2 days and the things were wilting and not doing well. So it can be a huge benefit. Yeah. If you're in a situation where, like, let's say you're watering, you don't have a drip system. Let's say you're watering by hand, or your watering situation is very labor intensive, and it is for a lot of people.
Or you live in those places where water costs an arm and a leg.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like, we live in town, so we pay for every ounce of water that we use. And for us, it's huge. To have that moisture retention in the beds, I mean, and the plants love it, because then you're not doing this thing where you flood the soil and then drain it and then flood it and then drain it and flood it and drain it every time you water, right? Because it's not going to evaporate that quickly, and it's not going to just run right out, right? The soil is going to remain moist for a lot longer. So, and I'm a sheep guy. I just learn all this from my wife, who deals with she's like the garden bed person. I'm like the animal guy. So she reports to me that this is an excellent thing. And I can see it. I mean, our garden is 10 times better this year because we used it versus the previous year that we'd run the garden. And then, that's one of the great benefits. The other one, pest control. Generally speaking, things like slugs and snails don't like crawling over the wool, because microscopically, if you look on a wool fiber, it's got scales. It almost looks like a fish, and they're actually quite an irritant for slugs and snails, especially when it's dry. When it gets wet, they're kind of, the water provides, I think, a little more lubricity, so that they're a little less they're less hesitant to go over it when it's wet. Anyway, so that's kind of a cool benefit. If you do have a slug or snail problem, it kind of can help you kind of abate that issue. And then the last kind of real big benefit to having it as a mulch or a top dressing for your beds is weed control. The weeds they have a pretty hard time coming up through it. So, you part the wool and give it like a little circle area where the intended plant can come up, and then the rest of the weed seeds, I mean, you'll see them. If you got a really tenacious weed, it might try and push up through it, but it's really hard for it to break through the wool, because the wool is just so sticky. I was going to say,
I'm going to have to try that, because I have massive weed issues.
Oh, it's huge. It's really cool. And the awesome thing is, you don't have to lay plastic down. You don't have to go buy weed block. You don't have to do any of this stuff. You just put the wool down, and eventually it will break down, but it's going to break down in the form of organic compounds and nitrogen. It's going to be great for the plants as it does break down. Whereas plastic sheeting, these other things, as it breaks down, it just becomes a contaminant in the soil, and it's kind of it's a bit annoying. The only thing I will say about the top dressing and using it as mulch is that birds will definitely visit and try to pull little strands out here and there to take it back to their nests in the spring. That has happened many times. So if you see birds messing with your beds after you put wool in, they're not after your vegetables. They want the wool for their nests.
Well, I already have a blue jay or something that's been messing with my garden anyways. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, how long does it take to shear a sheep? I know this is like a really basic question, but
no, it's a good question though.
Yeah.
A lot of people wonder that. So this is another one of those questions that people cannot stand, because my answer is always going to be, well, it depends on a few factors. So,
yes.
So let's look real briefly at the factors.
Like,
one of them,
how long would it take you to shear a sheep versus me?
Well, and that's the thing. Even if you ask me versus you could ask me versus one of the guys that wins the golden shears, and it's going to be like a quarter of the time, right? It's not even worth comparing. I mean, it's such a drastic difference in time.
Or that sheep that like everybody hates, but they keep her around because she has 2 babies every year. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like I'm willing to work with those people, because I'm like, look, you get 2 lambs every year out of this girl. I am happy to work with this girl if she is a difficult one to shear. But people who are like keeping around really difficult animals and they're not using the wool and they're not producing anything, I'm like, why do you have this animal? But pets are a totally different thing. So how long does it take to shear sheep? So obviously one big factor that we just talked about is experience. So how much experience does a person have? What breed are we shearing? The finer the wool, generally speaking, the finer the wool, the more wrinkles they're going to have, the thinner their skin's going to be. And that's going to require the shearer to slow down a little bit so as to avoid any skin cuts. So experience level of the shearer, breed of the animal, and then how long has it been since that sheep was last shorn? If I get people all the time who call me, say, hey, I got sheep, I rescued some sheep, whatever it is. I don't know when the last time was that they were shorn. I said, okay, send me a picture. And I can tell from the picture if it's been more than 2 or 3 years, because it's ugly. It's not pretty. And it's actually a great, it's an amazing thing that in some climates they're able to survive the heat exhaustion and the heat related effects of it. But so let's say we've got really good round sheep with tight skin. They're really muscled, right? And it's only been 11, 12 months since they were sheared. If I were shearing it and it was of a decent size, it would probably be, I don't know, if I were kind of getting a rhythm going and I had done quite a few of those or that day already, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes maybe. Okay. But people who are shearing commercially and they're on the same sheep, they're probably going to be getting them done in less than a minute each.
Wow.
So then the whole game becomes, how can I, go ahead.
And that's using electric shears, right?
Right. Yeah. Yes. That's a good thing to clarify. So with blade shears, if you were shearing that same sheep, probably if you're really, really good blade shearer, man, I'm not really into blade shearing, so don't quote me on this, but from the videos I've seen of people blade shearing, if you're really good, you're getting them done 4 to 5 minutes. Then that would be exceptionally fast with blade shears. Generally, blade shearing is going to take a lot longer.
My sheep would be missing legs afterwards.
Yeah. And then, with let's say, so every year I go to the University of California Extension in Hopland, which is actually an extension out of Davis. And I'm not sure.
It's funny because I mentioned Hopland earlier too, because that's where my friends who had the Navarro churros lived.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
But I've been out to the extension numerous times.
Oh, it's an awesome place. And so they have a really cool facility. Yeah. I go out there and I teach a shearing school every spring. Actually, we usually do 2 sessions and two back-to-back beginner courses. And in the beginning, man, the first couple sheep, it could be 45 minutes, could be an hour. It can take a while. I designed the course so that the first couple days we're breaking it up into phases so that students and sheep aren't sitting on the board for an hour straight, because it's pretty stressful for the animal and it's pretty stressful for the student. So I break it up and I say, okay, let's just do the belly and the crutch, and then we'll stop. We're going to put the animal back, let it get a breather. You can get a breather. Next person's going to do the same thing. And when we're all at the same spot, then we're going to move on to the first leg and start doing the undermine and all, the rest of the phases.
Well, and that's what I saw in your info, that you really focus on a low stress environment for both the animal and the shearer.
Yeah. There's no, I mean, I don't, there's no other way to do it and make it sustainable. If you cannot figure out a way to limit the stress to the sheep and the shearer, you know, it's going to be ugly. And when people who don't realize that early enough just don't shear that long, because it's way too stressful on your body. If you don't figure out a way to make it as limited in stress as possible to your body and to the animal, you're going to end up fighting the animal. You're going to get burnt out after an hour, and you're not going to be able to shear for 8 hours straight. Now, I sheared commercially in New Zealand, in the States a little bit, and in Australia. And typically you're going to shear for 8 hours in a day. That's shearing time. So your day is a lot longer. You do 2 hours in the morning, then you take a 30-minute break, generally speaking, and you do 2 hours late morning, take a 1 hour lunch, 2 hours in the early afternoon, 30-minute break, 2 hours to close the day. So you're gonna shear for 8 hours. And so if you don't figure out a way to limit the stress to your body and limit the stress to the animal, you're gonna just end up fighting animals all day. And the problem with shearing is it's a numbers game, right? You're going to try to get as many done as you can in the day, as well as you can. But each sheep that comes out of the pen is fresh, right? They've just been waiting all day for this moment. But you are worn out, right? So every sheep that comes out is charged up, ready to go, all rested, and you're worn out. So you really do have to figure out a way to try to limit the stress to both you and the animal.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize how big sheep are.
They can be very big.
Yeah.
They can be very big. I think the biggest one I've shorn that the owner actually knew the weight was 375 pounds. And it was a ram, a Suffolk ram. And that was not a fun time. I mean, they get big. I mean, some ewes are consistently 200 pounds. So if you can imagine just trying to drag a 200-pound animal over to your board and then shearing it and then letting it go. And then guess what you get to do now? You get to go grab another one and just keep going. And that's your whole day.
Well, I raise hogs, so, you know, I'm usually not having to wrestle them. But when I do, they are just a solid muscle, like tube.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So if you ever, I don't know, some people out there who know about baby doll Southdowns, and you probably do. If you get baby doll Southdowns, then you're almost a pig farmer. Because they are like the roundest, stoutest little sheep and they snort like sheep, and when they're shorn, they snort like pigs. When they're shorn, the sheep looks like a pig. It's very confusing. When they're the lambs, the reason people get these animals, this is my theory. The reason people get baby doll Southdowns is because they see a picture of the lamb. And the lamb looks like a teddy bear.
They're cute. I will give them that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to argue with that. That's probably how people end up with Pyrenees too. They see the Pyrenees puppy. It's hard to beat a Pyrenees puppy.
It's true. We have our Pyrenees. We're on 40 acres in grizzly country, so we have a reason for him. But yeah, he was definitely much cuter as a puppy than he is now, where he it doesn't matter how often we trim him, he likes to go bathe in the pond. So
yeah, that sounds about right. I would too. To be fair, I would do the same thing as a Pyrenees in the summer.
Yeah, but then he taught the labs how to do it. So yeah.
Oh, nice.
Just this crew of like giant wet dogs.
Yeah. You smell them before you hear them and see them.
Right. And then I'm pretty sure my 3-year-old thinks he's one of them. So yeah.
Oh, nice. Even better.
Yeah. So then he comes back, like muddy too. My husband's making fun of me in the background. He showed up. I sent him on errands when we couldn't get home. So
nice. Time management. Live and die by time management. Well done.
Right. Well, when you live 40 minutes from town, you
you take advantage. So, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, we had like a 4-H meeting today. We had to go to the bank, and we brought one car. We're not doing this in 2 vehicles. Not with gas prices the way they are right now.
Mm-hmm. So when you're homeschooling, can you, I don't actually know how it works for fair. I've sheared sheep for 4-H groups, so I know a little bit of how 4-H works. If you're homeschooling, can you still join 4-H or FFA, or do you have to enter as an independent? How does it work on the homeschool side of things for entering fair?
Every state is different.
Okay.
So I know, like in our state, and we were in Oregon before. I don't remember what it was for California. It doesn't matter. I mean, anybody can join 4-H.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if you're in school or not. But then like I know in the
Gotcha.
South for sure, a lot
Hmm.
of 4-H is within the school. So
Gotcha.
you have to be going to the school. Now, like for example, in Idaho, for FFA, you can join FFA. You just have to take the FFA class. So you have to go to school every day
Ah,
for
I
one
gotcha.
for one period,
I
which there's
gotcha.
a lot of teenagers that do that.
Right. Right.
Um, and then yeah, you're always welcome to show independent, but like our fair open class, there's maybe one animal in it. So that kind of takes some of
Right. Right. Right.
but
Yeah.
we'll have kids that like they had a barrow that got an infection when he was castrated, and so he never gained weight, and so they'll
Hmm.
bring him and show him in the open class just
Right.
to be able to still
Right.
have the experience and stuff.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
mhm. But yeah, other than that, I mean, the county that we live in, about 40% of the community homeschools.
Wow, it's 40% in Boundary? I didn't
Hmm.
realize that.
And that doesn't include the Mennonite families.
Ah, interesting.
So we're probably
That is
closer
interesting.
to, we're probably well over 50% of the
Oh, yeah.
community homeschooled.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it's a really great, I mean, people joke that we're just one big co-op because, I mean, we
Yeah.
have 4-H, we have meetings at the park.
Oh, yeah.
There are, I think there's 5 co-ops in town, but
Hmm.
everybody's kind of involved with each other. We did a homeschool prom 2 weeks
Hmm.
ago now. And I mean, there was probably 150 kids there.
Whoa, that is awesome.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah, it
really
was a
awesome.
really good time. So the kids have really great experiences here. And if we didn't have 4-H, I mean, I think that's half of the kids' education
Yeah.
around here.
Right, 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 right. Yeah. Yeah.
I know it is for my kids. I mean, we do our basics, but 4-H is pretty
Hmm.
serious to them. So,
Oh, yeah. It rounds everything out.
and I mean, even today was a Cloverbud meeting. We're starting with our 5-year-old,
Oh, nice. That's
but
awesome.
I'm a leader for 3 different groups. So,
Oh, cool.
yeah, I did 4-H my whole life, and I wasn't gonna not let my kids have that opportunity. And if I'm the
Hmm.
leader, then it helps them through the whole program,
Yeah, sure. Sure. Yeah, what a great
And
resource.
I have 6 kids. I'm going to be there anyways. Might as well just do it. So that's one of the things you do is you shear 4-H sheep, right?
So I have done it in the past. I haven't done any
Uh-huh.
up here yet. It's so
Okay.
usually what I would do in the past. I mean, I did do some of the show shearing before they would show, but a big thing I would
Mhm.
do is I would go in and just do a rough shear. I mean, they call it rough shearing. I just call it
Yeah.
sheep shearing, right? But for them, it's
Right.
rough because we don't use the fine clippers that are kind of like the clippers you'd use on a horse, right? That people use for really it's grooming at that point before the fair.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so I have done that too, but
We even
really
do
you
it with our
don't need
dairy
to.
cows.
Oh, yep, absolutely. So usually before fair, at least I don't know if it's this way up here for Boundary County or Bonner, but the fair that I was doing this for before was Ventura County Fair, and we, the vet required the sheep to be shorn before taggins or by taggins, basically. So they'd take their animal to the fair, they'd get the ear tag put in, the vet would look over the animal, make sure it's not sick, and then they'd go home until fair, right? And then they'd bring the animal back. Well, for that shearing, you don't really need to get down close to the skin like you would for a show. And really, it's not great for the animal because usually to do that kind of clipping, you have to wash the animal. And sheep have they have this coating all over their body. They're extremely oily animals. They have lanolin all over their body.
Mhm.
And so if you take that lanolin away by washing the animal in order to use these fine clippers so that they don't get dulled up by dirt and all these other things that are going to be caught in the wool, you kind of strip that barrier away from the animal, and then they're more susceptible to things like ringworm, especially if they're being kept with other sheep and people are touching them, right? As is often the case when you're raising a lamb. So being able to kind of just do a traditional shearing on them prior to taggins was great because it would eliminate that whole washing thing. They could leave all the lanolin on until just before fair, leaving the lambs a lot less susceptible to any kind of skin issues that might come up. And that's ringworm is a big deal in fairs because the animals are in close proximity to each other. Everyone's touching them, right? They've been washed and scrubbed down. I mean, squeaky clean is good, but it's not good for a long period of time, right? I mean, if the animal doesn't get those defenses back, it can be kind of a problem. So that was a big thing I would do. Yeah, exactly. Just like us, right? I mean, yeah, if you just bathe all the time over and over and over, you're going to get skin problems, right? You cannot just be that clean all the time.
Well, I think I bathe my kids that often, but then they go back and roll in the manure pile, so we're even.
Yeah, they put the seasoning back on, right? Yeah.
Right? It's like a cast iron skillet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, this might be outside of your wheelhouse, but this has been a question that I've actually been asked myself, and I did a ton of research and couldn't find an answer. How does lanolin affect the meat when you're butchering?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Okay, so I don't have any hard research, right? There's no peer-reviewed studies on this as far as I know. But from the people I've talked to and the farms I've been on that butcher their own animals, the ones that are really particular about the product, some people just want the meat, and I mean, the more kind of gamey and sheepy and muttony that it tastes, the better, right? For some people, but for a lot of people, they don't want that, right? And so for the people who don't want that, the piece of advice that I have heard is do not get anything that has been on the outside of that animal touching the meat when you butcher. So when you go to skin the animal, you need to be very cautious that the arm or the hand that you're using to grab the pelt to skin it is not the same arm or hand that you're using to touch the meat. If you do need to touch the meat at some point, generally speaking, when you're skinning it, you shouldn't have to touch the carcass as you're pulling the skin off. But in some cases it happens. And from my understanding, that is kind of what ends up tainting the meat, is if you do get the lanolin, because lanolin serves to allow, the way I've seen it serve this purpose is between ewes and lambs. There's a scent connection between the ewe and the lamb. And so often, one thing that, this is kind of slightly tangential, but does come back to the whole tainting of the meat thing. When you flip a sheep on its butt to shear it, and that's how I shear New Zealand style. So you take all to use the term of the guy who taught me to do it originally, you have to disengage the sheep's four-wheel drive. So you have to take all of their hooves off of the ground so that they can't just get up and walk away during shearing, right? So
yeah, that makes sense.
So when you disengage the four-wheel drive before shearing and you flip them on their butt, generally, if it's the first time you've ever seen shearing, it can be kind of shocking to see a sheep in that position, because you're seeing the belly and you're seeing kind of the inside of the rear legs and the inside of the front legs, and you've never seen that before. Because unless you have gotten on like a creeper and rolled under a sheep like you're checking the oil, there's no way you would have seen it, right? This is just like a mystery to most people. So you flip it over and it's like, whoa, all the lights down there. It was like all stuff I'd never seen before. One thing that people are shocked about is kind of right next to the udders, kind of like you might call it like the armpit of the rear legs, right? Like tucked in there, kind of in their crotch area. There are two ducts that secrete a significant amount of lanolin. And over the year, usually dust gets in there and dirt. And so it looks kind of black and nasty, but it's actually, it's not, it's quite clean. But it's right next to the udder, and the scent that the ewe produces, I think, is produced there in that location by design, right? That that's where the lamb needs to go for milk, right? And that's where the lamb's going to go and be like, oh, this is my mother, because it smells like my mother. That's my theory, right? So the lanolin does have a very strong smell. And so if you were to get that on the meat, it's probably going to taste like lanolin. And lanolin, for someone who's not a sheep person, does not smell very good. Once you're around sheep, I think, once you're around sheep long enough, it starts to smell kind of like sweet and nice. I think that, but it's one of those things you got to just be, I mean, it's like, right? Someone who's really into raising hogs.
We don't mind the smell at all.
You don't mind. It smells like, oh, this smells like, I don't know, just smells like raising hogs. This is normal. But if someone comes to your farm, has never seen a pig in real life, comes to the farm, is like, what on earth is that smell? Oh, that's I didn't notice. I forgot. Those are my hogs. That's just what they smell.
In our
like.
Case, we live next door to a maggot farm. So
usually
if they're like, what is that smell? It is not us.
It's not. yeah. They come to your place to get a break from the maggot farm.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. That's like a huge thing. Like don't. I mean, and this is true. I mean, I've dressed out a handful of deer, and one thing you always hear when you're dressing out a deer is the scent glands on their back legs. Do not touch that and then go touching the meat, because then your meat is going to all taste like that, and it's not a pleasant taste.
It's going to be the same idea.
Yeah, totally. So outside of the animal, keep it off the inside of the animal. Yeah, totally.
I field dressed a lot of deer. So, I mean, that same area in California where the extension office is was my family's ranch. We were down in Cloverdale.
Lots of deer. Yep. Lots
of deer and lots of pig. My dad was a pig hunting guide.
Awesome.
So, spent a lot of time in those woods.
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful down there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I wish it wasn't the way it is, but it's beautiful up
Yes.
here, and I'm happy. I'm
Yeah.
happy here.
Yeah. Not as big a feral pig problem here, which is nice.
No, unless it's our pigs who got out.
Yeah. Yeah.
My yard looks like it did in California, so. But so if someone wanted to, get started with sheep and, just kind of, do you have like just a handful of like some quick steps on where they should research, who they should talk to, some of those types of, get going?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you've got an audience that is international, I believe, at this point, pretty much, right? You've got people listening to you all over the world. So I can speak to the United States. It's going to be really hard for me to speak.
A lot of people in I have a lot of people, actually my biggest out of country is Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So
I believe it. Okay. Yeah. So Australia and New Zealand, you want to get sheep, just go talk to your neighbor. Chances are they either have sheep or they know somebody directly, like 1 degree of separation from someone who keeps sheep. Right. Chances are, unless you're in a city, like if you're in Auckland or you're in Wellington in New Zealand or you're Melbourne or Sydney, you may not have that 1 degree, probably 2 degrees. Right. Right? Yeah, right. In the United States, man, you'd be in a big city in the United States and not have 5 degrees of separation from someone who's got sheep. There's people that don't even
know what a sheep is.
Oh, so. Yeah. They think sheep and goats are the same thing. So, okay. So if you're in the United States, the one thing I would first figure out is who your state small ruminant specialist is. Right. Figure out which office that is. It's going to be an extension office likely. And figure out if your state extension office has any publications on raising sheep or raising goats. Sometimes they get lumped together. Depending on the state you're in, you might have a separate publication or separate resources for sheep and goats. That's going to be a really good first step because chances are you're going to be getting information that's tailored to your state, right? And each state, I mean, like Idaho, for example, I mean, we have vastly varying topography and climate and all that in the state of Idaho. And the same is going to be true for a lot of the other bigger states. Even some of the smaller states are going to have really varied microclimates and things. So, but it's going to be a good approximation, right? And so once you get those resources from whoever the state organization or specialist is, then you can kind of zero in on your county. And if your county doesn't have a small ruminant specialist, don't be surprised. Many counties don't, right? But they can probably direct you to somebody in the state, in the extension system, that can get you the resources you need for your area. Because if they're a specialist in small ruminants and they live, like let's take Idaho, for example, you've got a specialist in small ruminants that's in southern Idaho in the Treasure Valley. Well, the climate is totally different, right? And the sheep that are good down there are not going to be the sheep that are good up here. But that person's going to know what sheep would be good up here, right? Because if they know sheep, they're going to be able to point you in the right direction in terms of which, breed selection, for example, which one do you want? Another really good resource is just going to be like what we're doing right here. I mean, there are so many really cool podcasts and YouTube channels and things that you can go to. It's amazing.
I have a podcast saved that I want to go listen to, and it is from a small ruminant extension office, I think, somewhere back east. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about, but there is one called Sheep Stuff You Should Know. And yes, it is EWE, because if sheep people are good at nothing else, it is like making puns with sheep terms. So Sheep Stuff You Should Know, that's a really good one. One person who is like a co-host on there is Dr. Rosie Bush, and she's the state small ruminant veterinarian for California, and she's tons of really good resources and really good information, and they cover a vast array of topics. So if you want to know something like, hey, I'm just starting and I have a question about lambing, okay, we'll go through their podcast and find the one on lambing, and they're probably going to cover the questions you have. That's a really cool resource.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah. And then get in touch with, if you're just totally lost and you have no idea what to do, find someone locally that has sheep. Okay. I promise you they exist. And so a couple of good points of,
it's one of those ones I know someone too. Like when we first started getting started with dairy goats, I knew meat goats. I didn't know dairy goats. And I was able to find a mentor that I could go to her house in the middle of the night and get the medications I needed.
Oh yeah.
Like that.
It's huge. So I would say, like, before anything, If you have the animals already, which is often the case, people work backwards. I do the same thing. I got rabbits and I was like, how do I raise rabbits? I should have asked that question before getting the rabbits, but whatever, that's how it goes. So if you're in that position, just find someone locally that has them. Chances are they're going to be open to guiding you because everyone's been a beginner. Everyone knows what it's like to get your first animal of whatever species, right? You just got to figure it out on the fly, and they're generally going to be willing to help you. So one great place to look, just go to a feed store, go to your local feed store and say, who raises sheep around here? How do I get in touch with them? Usually they're going to have the contact info for them, or you can just leave your contact info and, the guy's going to be showing up the next day for his hay anyway, or whatever, and they can put you in touch with them. That's a really cool way to get in touch with people locally. And that's going to give you even better information, I think, than a state specialist that's not in your county, because this is someone who's in your community, right? In your immediate area. So that's a really good place to start.
That's something I teach on a lot, actually, is make sure that you find someone that fits your climate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That goes for anything, right? Mm-hmm. That goes for what snowblower do I buy, right? It doesn't, doesn't have not just animals and raising vegetables and all this. It's everything. So having that community is huge. So that's where I would start. There are a few good books, right? But yeah, any of the really popular how to raise sheep books are going to have useful information in them, but it's not going to be everything. There's emerging research all the time on what we should do. For example, one thing that's emerging now is dewormers, right? So the conventional thought on dewormers has always been, well, you got to rotate them, right? Well, they've actually discovered now, a lot of the research that's coming out is showing that rotating dewormers, and this is a good thing to go to Sheep Stuff You Should Know, that podcast. They've done tons of coverage on this. They've discovered that rotating dewormers is actually kind of the perfect recipe for creating worms that are resistant to dewormer. So there's, in sheep, and I can't speak to other livestock. I'm guessing the principle would carry over, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's only a sheep thing, but that's kind of an interesting thing, because that's been the conventional wisdom for a very, very long time. And they're actually discovering, no, actually, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. People who worm preemptively, right, or deworm preemptively, it's largely shown now that it's a bad idea to deworm if you don't have to, right? Unless you see symptoms, probably shouldn't be administering dewormer. Kind of like antibiotics, right? We don't want to give antibiotics all the time, because then you're just creating a breeding ground for bacteria that don't care about the antibiotic anymore, right?
That's exactly the truth. But I like bringing up that conversation, because it is important to know when you should, when you shouldn't. And
oh yeah, it's huge.
Because I see so many new farmers, new homesteaders say, oh, I'm not going to give any commercial medications.
Right.
That's like, you bring a new animal onto your property, you get them all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Start them fresh,
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things where there's two ends of the spectrum, right? You've got the extreme ends, and generally speaking, as in most things, there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of, well, it depends, right? A lot of people don't like the well, it depends. And that's why you get so many people at the extremes. That's my experience with most things anyway. It's hard to sit there in that nuanced middle ground and have to grapple with the question, right? That's hard.
I had my moments as my own. I grew up in commercial farming. I majored in commercial farming. I worked in commercial farming.
Yep.
And now I'm definitely outside of that bubble. And I have to even grapple with myself a little bit on, it's spring, we better go worm everybody. And I'm like, I have no reason to believe that anybody needs to be wormed. The worm load is always there. It's whether or not we have it under control.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And that's,
we're like, piglets are really susceptible to worms. So before I send a piglet away, I worm them before they leave my property, so that I'm not sending out an animal that's going to get to someone else's property and just go downhill.
And just collapse. Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a targeted approach is best for most things, which is kind of, it's cool that the research showing that.
Yeah, my sows, they almost never get wormed. I do more things like diatomaceous earth, and I put pumpkins and stuff like that there. And if I see someone getting sick, or if somebody goes to fair with us or something, then we do all those things.
Right, but you can keep it at a controllable level, right? With by being proactive and watching them, and that's great. Yeah.
Especially in the spring when the grass is really short and they're like eating right down to the dirt.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So we're about to the end of our time. So I have to ask, what does keep growing mean to you?
Keep growing. Oh man, never stop asking questions. Never be afraid to say, I don't know, and never be afraid to ask for help.
I love that. It is so important to be able to be willing to learn.
Oh yeah.
Oh, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you, or?
Yeah, I'm not actually findable on social media because I'm not on social media, but I do have a website. It's hollenbackshearing.com, and there is a contact me page. I have email. Okay, I'm not like completely in the Stone Age, and I do have a mobile phone on there. If anybody wants to contact me about shearing or sheep related things, by all means, you can. I shear typically just in this region, so kind of the panhandle of Idaho. And I do.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and then you're gonna be speaking next week, which I think I'm actually I might air this on Tuesday just for that reason.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yeah, that'll be great. I think the Inlander, which is kind of a regional publication, is going to be doing a little spot for the Modern Homesteading Conference too. So that'll be cool to keep an eye out for that. Yeah. So I'll be there at the Modern Homesteading Conference. I'm going to do a talk about kind of just sheep shearing on the homestead. And so kind of what that looks like for the sheep owner, what that looks like for the sheep, what that looks like for the shearer, so that we can kind of close the loop on that. Because a lot of people, they just don't know what to expect when a shearer comes. So that'll be kind of a good one. And then, how to use the wool and some of the stuff we talked about tonight.
Nice. I love that. Will you be doing an actual demonstration or just talking about it?
There will be a live shearing demonstration. Yes.
Well, I'll have to see if I can make it over to that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think
one.
The people who are, so Wingsong Farm is a local Shetland sheep farm here in the area, and they're going to be providing the sheep. And I've asked that they bring a few extras. So if you miss the main demo, I'll have a few at my booth, and I'm going to do some periodically for the people who can't make it. Because I know it's hard. Yeah. It's like you don't want to miss a really cool talk, but you want to see the shearing or whatever. I'll have a few more.
Well, and it's hard because I'm speaking too and have to run my booth the whole time. So.
Oh yeah, no, I've been looking at the schedule. It's crazy. I will not see nearly what all the things I want to see, but that's why my wife's coming. She's going to take great notes and probably learn more than I would have learned anyway.
I'm bringing my husband and kids, which my husband travels to a lot of these with me, so he's seen a lot of these speakers before.
Oh yeah,
and so have the kids. Actually, my kids have traveled more than my husband has. So
good for them.
Like they have their friends that they go and seek out at these conferences. So, but I was excited. Awesome. We got the map in the mail yesterday of where I'm going to be, and I'm like right next to my favorite makeup company, Toots and Co. Which my husband was like, my husband's like, that's terrible. But I'm like, my friend isn't going to be there because she has had a baby.
Oh.
The owner, she was supposed to come and speak, but she just had a baby last week. So. Wow. And then I'm like right next to Homesteading Family and Pioneering Today.
Oh,
like,
cool.
It's going to be like, I'm just right in this like corner of all these just really wonderful people. It's going to be such a great experience.
That is awesome. So. I love it. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we will be sure and find you, and we'll probably see you at the dinner on Thursday night.
Yep. We'll see you then.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And
thank you, Kody.
Talk next week.
Sounds good. We'll see you then. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today at the Homestead Education, and I hope that I have given you something to think about this week. To help others find me, please comment and leave a review on your favorite podcast player. You can also follow me on Facebook at the Homestead Education and Instagram at Homestead_education. Do you have questions that you would like answered or just want to say hi? Please email me at hello@thehomesteadeducation.com. Until next time, keep growing!